In this tutorial, we're going to start to create the working drawings for the shaker table project. Now, between the last tutorial and this one, I've done a little bit of housekeeping over here where I've moved the components that we made in the last tutorial. I've moved them into the table frame folder here. Just makes things a bit neater. Now, before we start on the working drawings, there's a little bit of woodworking design discussion that we need to have. Now, if you have a look at the drawer here, you'll notice that it sits flush with these front rails, and we really need to change that slightly. The reason why we don't have the front of the drawer sitting perfectly flush with these front rails is that in the real world, just with the vagaries of woodwork and timber movement and that sort of thing, is that the chances of being able to make a drawer that sits perfectly flush every time are basically zero. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to actually just left click and select drawer assembly and right click on it, and I'm going to select move. And you'll see this appears down here, and I want to move it along the y-axis, and I want to move it 5 millimeters. So I can just go down there and just change that. And basically that's how I would do this in the real world. I would have my drawer so that it basically just sits 5 millimeters in back from the front face there. We can even orbit around and have a little bit of a look at that and see what we think. Personally, I think that looks a little bit better. So now let's start looking at drawing. The first drawing is going to be an overview of the entire table. So we'll go to Design, Drawing, from Design. So it's going to be full assembly. You can see we've got a few choices here. We're actually going to use some other options later on, but this one is a full assembly. So we're creating a new drawing. In terms of template, we're going to use the SCU template that I've provided for you. Now, the reason why I've made this template is their default templates. Their title blocks are quite large. They have information or space for information in there that's not relevant to us. And it wastes a lot of space on the page. So I've just created a really basic SCU template, but I've made it so that it aligns to AS 1100 standards. So we'll select that one. Now, the standards that we've got, we don't actually have AS 1100 sort of set up inside of Fusion 360. So the closest standards we can go with are the ISO standards. Units are set to millimeters, and the sheet size is A4. A3 is a more convenient sheet, but knowing that you guys are probably going to have to print these at home, you might not have access to that. So just press OK. And here it comes. Now, I've given you links to where you can get help directly from Fusion to change this, because obviously you're going to want to do some modifications down here. So first thing is, naturally the table is just going to appear, and the orientation, we can actually change the orientation if we want, but because we've kind of set it up properly in the first place, our orientation, front is front, top is top. The other thing that we want to do is we want to change the scale. So we can do that a couple of different ways. And sometimes, particularly when you're starting a new drawing, I know that's going slightly off the screen there, is you want to kind of play around with it. Now, I've set that to 1:10, and that's probably still a little bit small on the page. Even though it's a bit unorthodox, I've worked out that 1:8 is actually a pretty good scale for this. So in terms of Australian Standard 1100 and third angle projection, and I've got the third angle projection symbol down there, is I want to put my front view down here somewhere in the bottom left corner. So I've left click. Then what I can do is I can create a projected view off that. So if I click again and then move up, you can see that it's now giving me a top view. Now, if I go out here, this is where it's really sort of very good, how it sort of naturally knows what I want. There's my right-hand view. And then I can have a projected view up here, which is, look, it's not perfect, but it's nice to have that just sitting up there. So we'll put that up there as well. And then press escape. So you can see that we've got our basic views. We may need to move these in future, so you can still grab them. But the thing that's really good with Fusion is AS1100 insists that these views are perfectly aligned, and it does it automatically. You can see that if I grab a view, like if I grab the main view, the front view, it keeps everything else moves and keeps it aligned. Now, in terms of a full assembly drawing, I'm going to put some dimensions in here. The idea of a full assembly drawing is to give you a sense of the overall dimensions of a project. So we'll start with some basic dimensions. So I just click on dimension. Of course, the keyboard shortcut is the letter D. And you'll see that it actually snaps. The leader lines actually snap. Now again, AS1100, I'm going to come in really sort of close here. AS1100 would tell you that there should be about a 1 millimeter gap between the object and the beginning of the leader line. The leader line should be about 10 millimeters long, and the arrows should sit about 2 millimeters in from the end of the leader line. Now, in terms of what Fusion is doing, it's not quite adhering to that, but it's not too bad. The other thing you'll notice with the dimensions, it's not showing millimeters because we've already set that, and that's pretty much assumed that millimeters are our standard dimensions. Okay, so we've got that 450 there. So I go D for dimension again, and I want to get this dimension here. Now you can see that snapping into the wrong place, but this is where, if I just press escape, this is where I can then just sort of move this around a little bit to have things sitting a bit better. So we can kind of play around with it. And that's one of the beauties of doing working drawings in this kind of software. What else do we need to know? Well, we might want to know how long our legs are completely. So again, I can go in and set that up. What I want to do is AS1100 wants these arrows here to line up to be, or basically be aligned, and that's misbehaving at the moment. But one of the little tricks you can do is just set it like that, press escape so we're not doing any more dimensions, and then we can come in, and I've just left clicked on that. I'm just going to zoom in a bit, and I can actually use some of the little memory type functions in here. If I go up and hover over the end of that arrow and then just come back down, it actually remembers that. So it's kind of snapping. You can see it's still bouncing around a little bit though. So it can be a bit, it's just one of the idiosyncrasies of it that we have to work with. There we go. We've got that. So we know the overall size of our tabletop. We know the length of our legs. Okay, so now we might need to look at some nested dimensions. So for example, the leg has a taper on it, and what we want to know is either how long is the taper or how much of the leg is not tapered. So again, we can go to dimension, and you can see it actually does find that point down there where the taper ends. So if I click at the top here, move down the line. Now I do know that dimension is 150, so I can go in there. Now I've got a little bit of a problem here because when we nest a dimension, AS1100 wants to have the smaller dimension closer in and the larger dimension further out. So you basically go from inside to outside, smaller dimensions out to larger dimensions. And we're just going to run out a bit of space here. That's why I don't like the fact that it's making these leader lines quite long. So I'm just going to park that one in there. The other thing that I don't like about it, and I can't actually change this, is you'll see how this leader line crosses over the model. And again, that's against AS1100. The leader line should start off the model, and you can just then determine what it's pointing to by your eye. Well, let's go back out and have a look at that. So that's not looking too bad. To finish off this tutorial, I'm just going to put on a few more dimensions, and then we will move on to some more detailed drawings in the next tutorial.